I'm the Business Development Manager of Recoded, a non-profit tech organization preparing talented youth in conflict-affected areas to enter the digital economy as software developers and tech entrepreneurs. Today, we are doing the third session of a series with founders and investors of technology companies in Turkey, where we get to learn the stories behind how they built their businesses. We will also hear from them about how businesses can adapt quickly during COVID-19 and what opportunities they believe will spring from the crisis. So before we start, a quick round of ground rules for this session. The conversation between Enis and I will take about 30 minutes. Please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen to leave comments or ask questions. You can do that now or at any time during the session. Our team will be selecting some of the questions, which I will ask the speaker in the last 30 minutes of our session. Your microphones will remain mute during this session, but feel free to put your camera if you wish. It's always good to see your faces and your reactions. Please note that this session is being recorded. We are able to do this speaker session because of a partnership between our team at Recoded, Techstars, the GIZ PAT program, Promotion of Economic Prospects in Turkey, and Impact Hub Istanbul. We are teaming up to provide opportunities for youth across Turkey to enter the digital economy through tech and career prep training. Now, back to today's speaker. Enis Hulli is a general partner at 500 Startups Istanbul. Educated as an engineer, he has a firm grasp of technological aspect of the startup world and the ambition and the knowledge to see the global potential in the regional startup scene. That's why, rather than venturing on the civil engineer path, he founded First Seed, a network of investors focusing on the early stages of investments, early stage investments. He aims to cultivate and grow the Turkish startup ecosystem, help talented entrepreneurs of the broader region and the diaspora in building explosive businesses that will integrate with Silicon Valley. His goal is to position 500 Startup Istanbul as a leading actor in the region in order to reshape the future of innovation at EMEA. And 500 Istanbul is an early stage VC fund within the San Francisco-based 500 Startups Network, a leading global venture capital seed fund and startup accelerator with over 2,400 investments in more than 75 countries and venture partners in more than 25 countries. Enis, it's really a big pleasure for me and an honor for me to have you as a speaker here. I would like to thank you. I want to send my deepest thanks to you for all your supports, both for Tech Accelerator, like bringing incredible people, great investors as advisors to program, successful entrepreneurs as speakers to our program, and connecting us with top tier trainers. So I'm really glad that you helped us on this. And also you have actually brought some of the great speakers for these sessions as well. So my deepest thanks to you.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure. I mean, the honor is mine.
Thank you. So could you introduce yourself? I've just shortly talked about you, but please go ahead and introduce yourself.
First of all, that wasn't short. Second of all, just for me to tell a bit about myself, I was an entrepreneur back in 2010. I started a company called GoodBuzz in the UK. Back then I was doing in Canada, but I was going back and forth between Canada and the UK. So we started GoodBuzz. It was an affiliate marketing platform. And we raised a small seed round that would get us going. We finished the product, had some early traction. We were going for a Series A. Then at the end of 2012, I decided to leave the company, transferred all my shares to my co-founder, finished college, came back to Turkey, joined Rocket Internet. Back then, Rocket was doing a horizontal e-commerce, which was going to hopefully compete with the e-commerce giants here locally. Didn't work out that well. So Rocket Internet decided to leave Turkey. So I didn't know what to do. And since I did civil engineering, I had a master's in project management. I was like, hey, why not do some heating, ventilation, air conditioning, so some mechanical engineering work to earn money. And as I was earning money, I always wanted to be tied with the ecosystem. So to better do that, what I decided to do was start an angel network so that I can write checks of 25K to 50K to really early stage companies that are deciding to go global from Turkey. And to push companies to go global from a place like Turkey to the US, I tried to form connections with different VC funds, one of them being 500 Startups. So that's how I get connected with the team. And from angel investing, I turned to become a venture capitalist basically over the past few years.
Thank you, Enis. So what was the real turning point? What changed in your life? I know that you were enthusiastic about this to make the startup scene reach a further network, but what was your turning point in your personal story? Because you tried entrepreneurship, then you go back to something else, then you turn into investing. How was your decision points there?
I think the only real decision that I've made, so like starting a startup wasn't a real decision because I didn't know what to do with my life. It was early on. I didn't have any real skill set. So looking back, when I look into the product that we're trying to build, the pitch decks, the business model, etc., we knew nothing. I mean, I wouldn't invest in ourselves basically. Back, this was 10 years ago. So it wasn't a decision. It was just like, yeah, the water took me there. Then obviously it didn't work out that well, so I had to leave. Again, that's not a decision. Finished college, which isn't a decision. Come back to Turkey, again, not a decision because it's your hometown. Of course, you're going to go back to your hometown. Join an international startup who's trying to expand to Turkey, probably an easy thing to do. Again, not taking a big risk. Then Rakuten decides to leave. I try to earn money and I only have one skill set, which is civil/mechanical engineering and project management. So I go down that path, again, not a decision. Starting angel investing, not a decision. The only real decision that I made, and I think over the past 15 years, this goes from like choosing your high school to whatever I'm doing right now, choosing my girlfriend or my future wife, I don't know. The only decision that I've made was actually, I think, quitting mechanical engineering and becoming a full-time VC. That was the only point where I actually took a risk. There was an opportunity cost. I was actually making good money, but I didn't want to pursue my life for the next 30, 40, 50 years, doing what I've been doing for the past 3 years. And what I've been doing was I had these construction sites where I was doing ventilation, air conditioning, plumbing, sewage work, etc. to large constructions all around Turkey. And I was basically earning money, but I didn't like how I spent my time. I wasn't improving myself. I wasn't learning anything. And I really wanted to go down the technology path, which was much more inspiring for me. So I think the only decision was actually to turn full-time in the startup scene, because for a year, a bit more, for close to 2 years, I was an angel investor, but that's not a full-time job. That's what you do part-time, once a week, twice a week at a maximum. So I think that was the only decision that I've actually taken.
How was your angel investor part preparing you to make this decision? And how did you start to work with 500 startup? How did you get into these networks? How it was building for your journey, in your journey?
Yeah, so like as I did 4 or 5 different small investments, and after these 4 or 5 investments, as I've said, like I was trying to push them to the US. And back in 2015, most of the 500 startups executive team came to Istanbul for a conference. And as they were here, first I met them in the conference, and we went out for dinner. That's when I realized they're expanding globally, and they're opening these local funds in places like Middle East, Mexico, Japan, Canada, etc. They're only going to invest into their local region. And we connected well. So they invited me to go to their Stanford program, and they had a really good program in Stanford. It's a short program, but still it tells you about the basics of investing. So once I get enrolled to the program, I had 2 months. For 2 months, I read a lot of books because I didn't know shit about, to be honest with you, about startups or venture capitalists that much. I mean, obviously, I've done a couple of investments here and there, but it wasn't, I mean, I didn't have that big of a knowledge in the scene. So I went to Stanford, and during Stanford, during the courses there, I realized that 500 Startups is actually expanding globally. And one of the funds that they're building is the Middle Eastern Fund. And their investment thesis is that what happens in the Middle East, to invest into proven business models with locally strong founders. So if there's a business model for scooters, good example, that's popping up everywhere in the world. And if you're a fund in Egypt, what you would do is invest into a scooters company in Egypt because the market is big, and an entrepreneur locally is going to build a company like that, which isn't what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was to invest into the local talent to build globally facing businesses. I didn't believe in the Turkish market as much. I actually believed in hedging the Turkish market, which is why they decided to carve out Turkey. So currently the Middle East fund doesn't cover Turkey, it's up until Turkey. And then our fund, we cover Southeast Europe and Turkey. So with Southeast Europe being places like Bulgaria, Greece, Ukraine, Romania, and then of course Turkey, our whole thesis is to invest into globally facing ideas with locally built teams. So coming back to your question, I did a whole 360. I connected them through a conference, but what turned out to be really well was we connected well. I went to their Stanford program. We again connected really well. I pitched my idea, and my idea was, hey, we should have a separate fund for Turkey. Turkey shouldn't be a part of Middle East because it's a whole different investment game. It's a whole different investment thesis. And they bought it.
Awesome. It sounds really a kind of a changer there, I think, because as you said, I think most of the successful companies now hedging Turkish market because they're producing the software or the technology here, or their engineers are working here, but they kind of have their headquarters or sales office in the United States or other places. I see this model is working quite well in general. So I think it was a good suggestion and decision there. So if we come a little bit to relevant situation nowadays, the world is changing too fast or changed too fast, let's say, due to COVID-19. How is that changing investors' life or corporate ventures cycles? How is it affecting the business at the moment?
I mean, I think it's affecting a lot in different levels, everyone. So if you look into our portfolio, all of our companies had this really aggressive growth trajectory that they're going for. But as people say, flat is the new hockey stick. So you can't grow your business in this atmosphere. What you can do is you can just try to maintain it and survive and go through this path, through the path. So it sucks on two levels. On one level, you can't find customers, you cannot generate cash. On the second level, you cannot raise capital at all. A lot of the funds that I know of, including ourselves, we're not doing any new investments, but rather we're doing follow-on investments into our portfolio. So rather than building out the portfolio, you try to save money so that you're going to help your current portfolio companies to survive, no matter how long this whole struggle ends up being. So I think from an investment perspective, they can't raise capital. From a customer perspective, they cannot generate revenue, and only the ones who have cash or who can find ways to find cash are going to survive. But the optimistic view that I have, and I strongly believe in it, is that this is not that bad for our companies because our companies didn't have that much liquidity to begin with. We always told our companies, hey, you have to be 6 months away from profitability. You cannot be 3 years away from profitability. You're not a Silicon Valley company. You cannot be 5 years away from profitability. It just doesn't work like that in Turkey because if there's a capital crunch, which happens almost every fucking year, you have to be able to survive and go to survival mode. And once you go to survival mode, in 6 months, you should be able to turn profitable. So looking at today, I believe all of our competitors or most of our competitors who are based in the US, they had a lot of liquidity, they had a lot of capital, they had a lot of cash, and their whole model is to burn capital for 3 to 5 years. Those are going to fail. Whereas our companies who are more nimble, agile, fast, can become break-even really easily because they're much more cost-effective, they're going to survive. And as they survive through the crisis, they're going to be much better positioned than their competitors. So the general optimism that I have is for the ones who can survive, and I think most of our portfolio will, they're going to be better positioned than how they were positioned a couple months ago.
I see. What do you think about in Turkey? We are kind of used to crisis, economic crisis or political crisis. We are somehow used to it. So do you think this kind of exercises in the past is helping Turkish startup ecosystem to adapt when these kind of things are rising? Do you think this is helpful, and how?
Yeah, definitely. I think the most important thing in crises like this one is for the leader to have a clear mind. If the leader doesn't have a clear mind, no matter how severe the crisis is, it's going to impact more the company. The employees will leave. They're not going to be optimistic about the future. They're going to look for ways to abandon the business, obviously. And having a thick skin towards different crises, which is one of the characteristics of people from this region, is really important because none of our founders are crying out. None of our founders are as worried as the founders in the US. Because for them, crises like this one have been happening every year or once every 2 years. So because of that, they have this inherent optimism and the guts to survive. So even if the things go hard, even if they have to lay off 30% of the workforce and then do another pay cut to another 20% of pay cut to the remaining people, they're able to do that because they have done that before. If they haven't done that before, they have been in places who have done that before. So this whole experience of going through crises makes you have a thicker skin, which helps you have a clearer brain, a clearer mind, so that you can actually make these decisions. It's always more important to make these decisions early on than later. So if there's a crisis, and let's say this happened 2 months ago, it started affecting Turkey, most of our companies reacted really fast. even before us speaking with them, we learned that they've laid off 30% of the workforce. They want to go break even. And the whole reason of that is it's really easy to ramp up after that. But it's really tough to ramp down if you wait for a couple of months to see where this tends towards. So we try to push our portfolio so that they take measures early on, and they are able to do that.
Yeah. So they're pretty quick to act because they can see this kind of fluctuations or effects early on, or they're more alerted in general to these kind of things and act on it. So I would like to ask, you said that the stronger ones or the nimble, agile ones will survive this and they will become stronger. But what kind of word is going to be there for this kind of startups? What kind of opportunities do you think will rise? How market will shift? We are already seeing that like Netflix, Zoom is doing much better business nowadays. So these big names, but there are also other names that getting the fruits of market is changing. What is going to be like when this is done, this is finished?
I think like there are some obvious winners, like health tech is going to be a winner, education tech is going to be a winner, like work from home, entertainment content, all these are obvious. I think the less obvious ones are right now, companies were really investing into digital transformation, they were. And that's going to stop for the next 2 years because a lot of these large enterprises, first they have to go back to survival mode, not spend money to digitally transform. But after we go through the crisis, there's going to be a huge liquidity in every single market. And that liquidity will again push these companies to transform digitally. So I think any legacy industry, whether that's construction, which is a really legacy industry, waste management, another really legacy industry, all of these different legacy industries where technology hasn't touched at all for the past 30 years, will now see technology touching it in different pieces. Because the human factor, so a lot of companies are going to try to diminish the human factor because they're affected by it. Just to give you a small example, let's say one health tech company in our portfolio called Spiro Home. They have this smart spirometer for asthma patients. And as we were trying to sell this device to hospitals, saying that, hey, you should buy this device and give it to your patients so that they don't have to come to the hospital. You can just manage them remotely. Hospitals didn't want that because for them, patients are customers. They want customers to come back so that there's a higher patient retention on the hospital side. Not the case anymore. People don't want to go to hospitals. So they started buying the device. And it really increases the adoption of these devices. That's kind of a good health tech example. A less obvious one, let's go from construction. We have a company that does remote construction management. So we have these 360-degree cameras that scan the environment and then push that data into the project management app. Let's say in this room, there's painting going on, there's piping going on, there's metal work going on, whatever that is. So we were trying to sell in the US really fiercely this product, but the basic idea was, oh, we have field engineers. Our field engineers are taking notes anyway. So again, our technology couldn't replace the human, but now our technology is going to be able to replace the human because the human is out and won't be going to the construction site maybe for the next 6 months or 12 months, especially to really remote places. If you're a UK company doing construction management, chances are you're not going to be able to fly up to your large construction in Nigeria to manage that for the next year. So I think it's going to fuel digital transformation in a lot of the industries. For any entrepreneur who was operating in any industry, the basic line of thought should be, what was not cost effective that's going to be cost effective today? Or where was the human factor so situated that I couldn't sell my product? Maybe those balances are shifting. So now I can actually try to replace the human within that value chain. So that's what we're trying to do with our portfolio, like Evreka, waste management. Now we're trying to automate more and more and take the human part out of the operation, from at least from reporting purposes. So I think entrepreneurs should focus on trying to replacing the human more and more because it's going to be more cost effective to replace the human after this period ends, obviously.
Mm-hmm. By the way, Umutcan was here as well as the first speaker from
nice.
Evreka. Most of the people are already familiar with Umutcan, I guess. And the founder of Spiro Home, I think there was a lot of media attraction for them as well, because I've been seeing them. I think I've known them for 2 years or something around. But they were quite popular since the COVID-19. I've been seeing on TV, on magazines. So there was a crazy demand, I guess, for this kind of tools, probably for other things that helps people working remotely or doing things in a more effective way. So, but when I would like to go back to your personal story once again. While you were starting as an investor, how did you build yourself? You said like you went to Stanford, did this 500 startups program, and you were reading books. But how did you build your mindset as an investor? And did you have any mentors around you who were teaching you how to make this kind of decision? How you could just how was that part of the process?
So first of all, that was an motivation for me. I tried to have my own advisory board. Think of myself as a company. I have to have my own advisory board who are people like advising me, mentoring me. I tried to put that up and running like 5 years ago. It didn't work out. So that's something that I tried that didn't work out. But maybe if I was living in the US, surrounded by mentors, I can have a bigger pool of champions whom I can meet with every month for lunch, discuss what's going on in my life, take some advices. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that, but that's a really smart idea to do. What really fed me was I was listening to a lot of podcasts. So while I was doing the mechanical work in Eastern Turkey, it all started with listening to podcasts because you're in a construction site for 8 to 10 hours a day, and there's nothing to do. So you speak with the guy who just gave you the job, but I don't feel like I'm improving myself as I speak to him. I speak to my own workers who are working on the construction site. I feel like I'm not improving myself as I speak with them. So I tend to have my headphones on and listen to podcasts. So I dive deep into the podcast world. Listen to maybe every episode of This Week in Startups, the 20-minute VC, the pitch, etc. And that really feeded me a lot. So that's how I turned into an angel investor, maybe thanks to Jason Calacanis. Actually, I even sent him an email saying, oh, I was listening to your podcast about how great angel investing is while I was in a construction site in Erzurum. Guess what? I first became an angel investor, but now I became a VC. He responded, so it was like a nice memory that I had. So it started with podcasts, but then after I started angel investing, I turned to books and I read a lot of books. I put them all into my Goodreads account. With those books, actually, first I tried to gain the startup experience and technology experience, let alone investing, understand that value chain. And then I read some books about investing, which would, for me to have more concrete ideas around it. So I think it was more like me doing alone without that much support, but a lot of the online content that's ready there available. That's why for a lot of the entrepreneurs that I speak with, that's an unfortunate thing to say, but rather than going to local events and listening to local speakers, if you're not looking for something particular, go to the best source. So go online, and online you can find much deeper, better content for whatever you're looking for. That's what I'm doing even today. So whenever I go out for a walk, and I do that now that I'm in quarantine, I go for like really long walks. The main motivation for me to go to long walks is I can listen to 3 hours of podcast.
I'm a fan of podcasts too, and I would like to. This is kind of interesting that you're talking about your kind of your being a fan of a podcast or getting a lot of value from podcasts. I would like to. I think the first time I heard your name was on a podcast as well. Probably it was Girişimci Muhabbeti, which is entrepreneur conversation, something like that. It's a Turkish podcast. So I think that was it. And I was on the road, I was listening to you. And then after a while, I just met you. So it's kind of an interesting story. So I would like to ask, probably you did somehow become accustomed to podcasts, you liked it, and then you started to do yours. But what is the story behind your podcast about Glocal?
So my main intention was I go to a lot of conferences for deal sourcing. So I go to places in Central Eastern Europe like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, Serbia, etc. to these conferences. And there are a lot of, in every city that I go to, there are a couple of success stories. So there are these local powerhouses that ignite the entrepreneurial ecosystem within that city. And then a lot of the entrepreneurs come out of that company. And those are like the first home run stories. As to say, of the local ecosystem. Even if you go to Lviv, city in Ukraine, really tiny city, you will hear about these like 2-3 stories of like some technology entrepreneurs who are exporting technology to the US, who became really rich, etc. And these stories are really inspiring, and they really connected with me because they have the same problems that we have here in Turkey. They can't fundraise, they have to bootstrap, local customers suck, so they have to sell to the US. No one understands them locally, but they have a killer technology team back at home, so they cannot just take their luggage and go move to the US. They don't want to do that. They still want to be back at home and leverage all the advantages that are here back at home. And those stories resonated with me. But when I go online, even on my personal life, when I listen to podcasts, all of these are really Americanized. A lot of the content on startups or VCs is really in the US. So a lot of the good stories that you hear are these two Stanford engineers out of college, they raised 50 million, they became a unicorn, etc. But those stories are not relevant for an entrepreneur from Turkey, for an entrepreneur from Iraq, for an entrepreneur from Saudi Arabia. These are not relevant. It's not going to happen to you. You're not that entrepreneur who just went to Stanford surrounded by billions of dollars of assets under management and you're going to raise 20 million within the next 12 months. It's not going to happen, unfortunately. But still, there are some success stories here as well. And my goal was, if I can cover these local success stories in English, a story from Turkey can be more helpful to an entrepreneur in Romania. A story from Bulgaria can be more helpful to an entrepreneur from Iraq. So that was the main inspiration. I tried to become the bridge between those ecosystems and cover these entrepreneurial success stories so that there can be more bridges within these ecosystems, because a lot of the ecosystems try to connect bridges with Silicon Valley. That's good, but they don't have any connections elsewhere. I think it's far more important for us to feel more connected to Sofia and Athens and Kiev than with Silicon Valley, because we can share resources, we have the same problems, we can tackle these problems together, etc.
I totally agree. When I was listening to the podcast, I remember sometimes like these are exactly like the problems we were having here or I've been seeing and so on. And I was feeling pretty close. Some of the entrepreneurs were huge, I guess. Their scale was very different than the things I've seen, but some of them was really like very similar things, and the problems were more or less the same genre. So it was very helpful and useful and aspiring for me to listen in general. So
Yeah,
thank you
for
your work. So actually, I have some other questions that myself and some questions also popping up when we are talking, but I would like to go into our guest questions. So Mohammed from Iraq is asking, does 500 Startup invest in Iraqi startups?
Depends how you, what do you mean by Iraqi startups? If the company is an Iraqi company with their top co in Iraq, then I don't think we would legally be able to invest. I don't think so. By the way, I'm talking about 500 startups in general, not about the Istanbul Fund. I'll come to that later. But if you're an Iraqi entrepreneur with ambitions to go global, you have your top company in the US, but your technology team is in Iraq, you have a subsidiary in Iraq, that's fine, that's better because you know the talent there, you can have access to talent even better. Then that's fine. As with the Istanbul Fund, our mandate is Southeast Europe and Turkey, so we are not covering MENA.
Thank you, Enis. This is kind of a, you can consider as a follow-up question. Actually, you said that like this part of the region is not considered in the Middle East, but what is your advice for growth for a Middle Eastern startup in a situation like this COVID-19? Should they go on the offense or defense? So Mohammed is again asking like, should they expand the runway by cutting things off? Actually, you mentioned about this, but what is the other part? Like they try to steal market or take market from other people by stepping up or leaving zone. What is your personal idea on there?
I mean, it obviously depends on what you do, but I think the number one rule is survive. So if you have to cut costs to become break even, or if you have 6 months of runway, it's better to have 18 months of runway, etc. So the first rule is, of course, survive. I think the second rule is, instead of trying to grow and trying to acquire customers, which would be really tough to do, it's going to be longer sales cycles, lower budgets, lower importance, probably, if your product is not a lifesaver for the companies. It's probably in their it's lower down in the priorities for them. But there are all these things that you can do which have a big snowball effect, things that they take time. So I think from a brand building perspective, from a community building perspective, from a market positioning perspective, you should be on offense. This is the time to be on offense to get your logo out there, because a lot of the people who are not reading that much content, who are not researching about stuff that much, are now doing it today. And it's really cheap to position your product in a lot of the markets. It doesn't require that much effort. So a general advice would be, one, survive. B, do things that you would otherwise not do, you would otherwise not prioritize. In a normal world, you would prioritize sales over brand building because sales would give you cash. In today's world, you cannot prioritize sales because it's tough to happen. So you can actually prioritize the brand or the positioning of the company, which is what I would do, so that you would be even stronger after the crisis, and then you can push for sales. I think sales is a lagging metric, because sales is an outcome. What's more important is the input, brand building, marketing, having your marketing machine ready by pulling all these APIs so that you can collect these leads from different channels. All these are more inputs, and you should work more on the inputs than the outputs, because you cannot affect the outputs that much in today's world. There are all these extraordinary circumstances that you're not going to be able to control anyway.
Some of the companies who, for example, recently raised cash or raised investment and so on, I think some of them are focusing on their products right now, right? Is that right? People are just, yeah?
Yeah, I was just speaking to one of our companies. They raised a total of $105 million. I was speaking with the founder like 2 hours ago, and he said, oh, we just fired 50% of the people to be like close to break even, etc. But their technology team is in Turkey. Their technology team was 60 people. It's still 60. So he said, hey, we didn't fire anyone from Turkey because we feel like now is a great time to continue on building the product. Now that there's not that much demand, our competitors are failing out. The easiest thing to do would be to just concentrate solely on the product, so that after this crisis ends, we're going to have the best product in the market.
Yeah, that seems like I think the ideal strategy, what you have been telling about since the beginning. It seems like it's the best way to go, like building your product on one side, and then if you already have an established brand, then it's good. But if you don't, then of course working with small budgets on the marketing as well. So Bengal is asking about like this kind of expanding strategy as well. Which countries should a Turkish startup company prioritize for when they are going global, or what factors they should think about when they consider something like this? What would be your advice on this?
Yeah, I think there are two different ways to look at it. So for the first way to look at it is, if you're in an immature market, your market is just maturing. First of all, you have to understand whether you're in an immature market or a mature market. To be able to, the best way to understand that is to look at the competitors. If you have hundreds of competitors and then tens of competitors in the US, they became unicorns, they raised 20, 50, 100, whatever $million, then the chances are you're in a very mature market. If you're in a very mature market, trying to go from Turkey to US is suicidal. You're not going to be able to compete. The market is already mature, it's already established. It's really tough to find different niches to penetrate into in the US. So what the better thing to do would be grow in Turkey, understand your product differentiation, have some resources, either from a team perspective or monetarily, and then try to expand. But as you try to expand, again, you cannot go to the US, because a product that works really well in Turkey, chances are it's not going to work that well in the US, because it's a different maturity. The US market is a different maturity. So those companies try to go to markets that are similar to Turkey from a maturity perspective, whether that's Malaysia, whether that's Germany, whether that's, I don't know, Poland, Romania, it all depends. So first of all, you have to decide whether you're an immature or mature. If you're in an immature market, the market is just booming, and you just have a couple of competitors who raised a couple million, but you don't have a success story, you don't have an IPO, you don't have a large exit, the market is maybe doubling every year. If you're in one of those markets, then you should go to the US. You shouldn't even try to sell in Turkey, because you're trying to find early adopters who have high enterprise budgets. Both of them are in the US. You're trying to find investors who are investing in risky markets that are just turning out to be real markets. All of those are in the US. But if you're in an immature market, that becomes a bigger question, because are you going to go to Middle East? Are you going to go to Southeastern Europe, Western Europe, Africa, Southeast Asia? There's all these opportunities that what you should do. Then I think with that decision tree became two different verticals. First, look into your competition. If there are any other VC funded companies who are trying to cover that region, try to stay away from it if they actually have more resources than you. And the second is the lower hanging fruit. So which one you think is easier for you to do? That can be from language/culture perspective, that can be from customer base perspective, that can be from your personal connections. So one of our companies in the HR space, they grew to Greece. It's not because Greece is really strategically important or because anyone cares about Greece. It's more because they had the connections, they can generate revenue. So they went to the easiest place possible to just validate that they can grow internationally. I think so. The basic decision tree, at least in my mind, from a simpler perspective, is, are you in a mature or immature market? If you're in a mature market, then you have to go to a place that's similar to your market that you've been successful in, like Turkey. and within those similar markets, go to a place with less competition and a lower hanging fruit for you personally or from a team perspective or company perspective. But if you're an immature market, the market is really immature, then you should go for a mature technology market with high enterprise budgets. And chances are that's either the US or Western Europe.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But when is the ideal time? Which time would be right to go like to another market? How we can understand what are the parameters there, rather than the intention or the thinking? What is the objective things that we could observe, for example, to go global?
I think a founder's job is to validate things, have hypotheses, and then validate them. So if you're in an immature market, you first try to validate the product and make sure the product works, right? You validate that locally because you have connections. It's easier to have enterprise customers test out the product here, etc. But then to validate the price point and the unit economics, you're not going to do that in Turkey because Turkey is not your main market. So from the get-go, after you do your first 1, 2, 3 sales in Turkey, you have to try the US because Turkey is not your main market anyway. That's a different game than being in a market where you validate the product in Turkey. You know you cannot go to US because you're in a mature market. So now you have to validate customer satisfaction and the price point. You validate the customer satisfaction and the price point in Turkey. Now you have to validate your sales machine. You have to do that in Turkey as well. So you validate that with 4 different sales people and a content strategy, a marketing strategy. You can have an ROI of 3x, grow 4x year over year, etc. You validated those. Now is the time to validate a different market, that you can actually replicate this playbook in a different market. I think when the things are working out really well is the time to test out a different market for these mature companies. Make sure that you've validated all your business assumptions, and then don't try to validate them further. Try to validate them in a different market. A different market can be in terms of segments. So if you're doing enterprise, you can go down market. A different market can be in terms of different industries. You're selling to waste collectors, now you're selling to hospitality companies, for an example, in the case of Evreka. A different market can be geography. You validated in Turkey, now you're trying to validate it in Poland, for an example.
So what I understand is like building the process, validating it, so you have a blueprint of something working very well and you know it from the output. Then you can try changing some of the parameters in this machine, and then with the similar scale, and then go ahead, see how it works, and then continuously iterate this machine until it goes, it doesn't go. So unless it improves, you keep doing the same thing.
Exactly. These are if you're in a mature market. If you're in an immature market, then I think you should validate the product locally. You should validate the customer satisfaction and that the product works locally, but you shouldn't try to validate your price point, your sales, your growth locally, because we're not betting that you're going to be a local company. So we don't care what the price point is in Turkish lira, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. By the way, this question was Omar. Sorry, I didn't tell your name. And I'm going to ask Bahal's question. He's managing a very small startup, digital marketing agency, and he lost temporarily some of his clients after this COVID-19 events. And he has a lot of prospect clients, but they are looking for different kind of opportunities. But they might have sustainability issues. So he used to reject this kind of clients when they have sustainability issues, but he's considering this kind of clients to get because there is no other customers. And he is a little bit, let's say, disencouraged that could affect his business. And his question is like, what kind of questions he could be asking to himself while changing this kind of things, what he could be aware of, how could he evaluate if this could be dangerous for his business or not? Is there a framework there, or what could it be like?
If something is not sustainable from a unit economics perspective, then you should stay away from it. If you're selling something for $5 that costs you $10, to put it that way, you shouldn't do it. But if it's from a scalability and sustainability perspective, meaning you are selling something for $6 that costs you $5, but it's not scalable, it's really manual work, it's not product, it's more like services, then you should do it. A lot of our companies, they start as service companies that actually give service on a profit. And then as they move along their evolution, they try to automate more and more. And as they automate more and more, they become more scalable, higher gross margins. And then eventually, sometimes they turn into product companies, sometimes they don't. They stay as services companies. So I don't think it's bad to have a services business and as a startup even, and then try to automate bits and parts of it. A lot of large businesses, a lot of high-end enterprise products start as services, and then they automate bits and parts while increasing the gross margin, either by increasing the price or lowering the cost because you're automating it further and further. And then they call themselves product companies 5 years down the road. So if that's the case, I don't think it's bad. If the case is selling something on a unit economics negative, then of course, obviously it's bad. It would hurt the company.
Thank you, Enis. And Feras is asking that he has a startup based in Turkey, but he had few problems, and he's having issues with protecting the idea and the startup by registering it because he's a refugee. I don't know if you have a particular knowledge about this. I know that you have been doing some work with refugees as well, and the other thing is that funding it is another problem. So is there any advice that you could specifically share with Feras about this? Because he's funding it himself, he's at development stage, but when he released the app, how could he get fund for it? How could he find the right funding for it? And how he could survive this crisis? This is a little bit a hard question with most aspects of the business, but I'm just a messenger.
Yeah. So the part where like protecting the idea and the startup by registering it because I'm a refugee, that I have no idea. If this was a non-refugee, someone telling me, oh, I don't have to protect the idea, I would say, fuck your idea. Chances are your idea is worth nothing. And even if it's worth anything, you're probably the 1000th person to try that out anyway. So no one cares about your idea. Don't be scared of that. But if there's a special circumstance, because you cannot start a company, it's tougher as a refugee, you cannot maybe register patents if you want to. If this is a really high-tech startup, maybe you should, and you cannot because of a refugee. I don't know the special circumstances around it, obviously. About funding, it's tough for everyone in Turkey because there's not that much liquidity. And a lot of the companies that raise funding from get-go, either with a ready prototype or just from get-go with even not a prototype, they do it from their close circles. Either these are friends or family, co-workers, ex-boss, etc. If you don't have someone like that, just to like cold outreach, emailing people, and then having meetings, it's very, very tough. And the chances are really slim. So I think if I were an entrepreneur starting out with not that much material connections in Turkey, trying to fundraise from angel investors, as to say, I would probably not go down that road. I would try my close connections. If it's not working out, it's not working out. I would close that option, unfortunately, because there's not that much public awareness or appetite to invest into startups from Turkey. Like even the angel investors, I think, who take the lead, who give the decision that they're going to invest, a number of them, let's call them mandated angels. So let's divide the angel investor world into two. There are the mandated angels and the unmandated angels. These unmandated angels are just followers, so fuck them. They're not going to be the guys who are going to be convicted and give the decision to invest in your company. They just follow these guys. These are just some random followers, so you shouldn't spend any time with them. So these are the ones who actually take the lead, who give the decision, who build the conviction. They are mandated angels. Maybe they spend 20, 30, 50% of their time angel investing. So it's in their regular calendar to meet with entrepreneurs. That's what they do. They want to become angel investors. So those guys are the important ones, and those are the ones that you should convince. The number of those in Turkey is maximum 20, and that's it. So if there are 500 angel investors in Turkey in total, probably 20 of them are mandated. They build conviction. They actually make a decision, and all the rest decide either they want to follow them or not. But they don't give the decision themselves if no one else is investing. So when you look at it from that perspective, all you can do is try your close friends, family, ex-worker, blah, blah, blah. Go to these 20 people, get a decision, get an answer, and that's it. Don't waste your time meeting with like hundreds of them.
I think people will ask you about these 20 people's names from somewhere, from social media or by email. I think they will ask for the list.
Sure, it's all over the news. Like if you search for the prominent Turkish angels, the ones who are not just putting in 5K or 10K, but actually putting in 50K or 100K, which are more substantial amounts. There's only a handful of them. These are either ex-entrepreneurs or people who are really devoting their time into the ecosystem.
And Zakira is asking that, do you have any advice on managing cash flow during the crisis? Because you mentioned like reducing the costs. What is your advice? Do you have any advice about cash flow?
I mean, I have some bad advice, like don't pay your tax kind of advice, or don't pay your debt kind of advice in crises, but that's like a general advice that you should follow in Turkey. I think accounts receivable will become a huge problem, which means you should push for accounts receivable or make sure that the accounts payable becomes a problem as well, so that they balance out. Unfortunately, that's something that a lot of our companies have to do. And again, a lot of government subsidies, companies want to go towards even small things. So companies who aren't looking into subsidies for engineers because the government pays the tax on the engineer salaries are now pushing for those. That's something that a company should do as well. But that's all you can do. One thing that one of our companies did, which I think was really effective, was when you look into customer acquisition costs, what that means is how much does it cost for you to acquire a customer? That includes all of your marketing, that includes all of your site visits, all your meetings with potential companies, et cetera, et cetera. So you do look at it from a monthly perspective, how much you spent and how many customers you own. So one of our companies just realized that for the companies, for the deals that doesn't close in 4 to 6 months and go beyond that, it becomes a burden on the company. There's all these 10th meeting and 15th meeting, and it's really hurting the company. So the founder made this bold decision of saying, hey, if I'm in touch with someone for 4 months, and the deal doesn't close, I'll close it. I'll stop giving any resources. I'll stop taking meetings. I'll be like, fuck you. Because of that, the customer acquisition cost went down. Because of that, the burden on account executives went down. So I think a practical thing to do would be, if a sales cycle is going to take too long, then fuck it. You don't have that much time. And although these are all hidden costs within a business, once they add up, and it takes a lot of your brain power as well, all these deals that you've given contracts to, and all these like 20 different contracts that you follow on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, they do take up your time. They do take up the team's time. And to get rid of them was one of the tricks that one of our companies did.
It's really bold move, but I like how the founder treated there. It's really wise to cut it off because, as you said, doesn't make any sense after a while if you're not able to sell it in that. Of course, every product or service has its own cycles, but I think this is a good point to check like these hidden places nowadays. I think it's really wise. I would like to go. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, from a cash flow perspective, another thing that a lot of our companies are doing is, so in regular business days, what you would think is, how can I do what I'm doing better? How can I improve by a couple percent this today? So that if I improve by 1% every day, it makes a big jump in the company on an annual basis. That's not the way to think in a crisis. In a crisis, a good way to think is, what am I not doing that I should start doing? If you read the book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, he lays that out really well. So as a company that has cash flow issues, what you should be thinking is, what are some of the opportunities that I wasn't seizing before because I didn't need to, they weren't that profitable, they're not large enough markets, they're too service oriented, I'm a product company, so fuck it. What are some of the opportunities that you were just overlooking that maybe you should try out? Instead of trying to improve your current business, you should try to expand a new business line that you were overlooking but already have the resources or the skill set to deliver.
Brilliant advice. Thank you, Enis. I'd like to ask, I want to go a little bit back to your story. What kind of companies have you been investing so far? Is there any particular things about the team or their market or their technology? What do you prefer in general?
So it's all about the team, right? You invest into a team. And the basic rule of thumb that a lot of the VCs have is, if there are 100 deals on the market, let's say there are 100 startups raising capital in Turkey, do I have access to the best 5 of them? Are these entrepreneurs within those best 5? And are these A+ entrepreneurs? So that's the basic idea. So we invest into the team. And as we invest into team, If you just limit yourself to investing into A plus entrepreneurs, then there's not that much deal flow. So a lot of the times what we're investing in is the fact that although this is not an A plus entrepreneur, we're investing into the seed level company. And as the company grows, the founder is going to grow with it as well. So we either bet on the founder or we bet on the fact that the founder is going to grow and improve himself over time. Because the chances are, if you're the best person to lead a 10 people company, then you're not the best person to lead a 100 people company or a 1,000 people company, probably. Those are different skill sets. So from that perspective, it's all about the founder. Then coming to your question, different investment themes or patterns that we're trying to follow, a big trend or investment thesis that we have is B2B. 75% of our fund one portfolio is B2B. The reason for that being is a lot of the B2C markets are winner takes it all. You do this app or you have this product that you believe is going to be the leader in the market or is going to become the second best in the market. If it ends up becoming the 20th, then you're done because these are winner takes it all markets. Not the case with B2B. In B2B, if you're the 20th largest CRM, if you're the 30th largest ERP provider or HR tech company, you are big enough, you will be acquired. These are really much more fragmented markets with a lot of more acquisition going on. That's one reason why we invest into B2B. Another reason is success is really correlated to how much you raise in B2C. If a B2C company raises 100 million and you raise 5 million, it's really tough to beat that because both of you spend 80% of your capital into sales and marketing and he has 20x more cash than you. Not the case with B2B. B2B is much more product oriented, so you don't have to have the most cash in the world. You can try to find different niches that you're going to dominate, which would again make you big enough of a company to be acquirable. So because of those two reasons, we do a lot of B2B. We do a lot of mid-ticket B2B. So you cannot just say B2B and move on. You have to dissect B2B into different ticket sizes. So there's the low-end B2B stuff like MailChimp, you pay a couple of dollars a month, and you're trying to have millions of customers to be big enough. Zoom is a good example of that. Then there are these mid-enterprise tickets. Let's say you charge $1,000 to $10,000 per month. You are going for the enterprise, but you're not trying to sell to Oracles or Googles of the world. You're trying to sell to local banks in Turkey. Depends on what you're selling, but I mean that kind of customers. And then there are the high enterprise budgets, the Palantirs of the world who sell contracts which are each like million plus contracts, take longer sales cycle, different skill set, different kind of product. A lot of our portfolio is tucked in the middle. A lot of our portfolio, so 75% is B2B, and out of that, I would say another probably 60% are mid-ticket B2B. So companies that are charging 5K, 10K per month. I'm going for the mid-level enterprises, which are more predictable.
Any special industries or that kind of thing, or it's just these kind of section or?
So like, since you're trying to reach out to, if there are 100 companies today, you're trying to get the best 5, right? So being limited in a geography, if you also limit yourself with a vertical, then you're fucked. Like you don't have that much depth in the market, unfortunately. It's a shallow market. So if we said, oh, we only do fintech, or oh, we only do IoT, then what we had to do would be list out all the IoT companies and try to invest into the best of them. But maybe those companies are not the best companies overall in the market. They might not be. So I think if you're limiting yourself in a really shallow geography like Turkey, then you shouldn't limit yourself vertically.
Okay, I see. That otherwise you don't have any deals around it, or you have to stick with some verticals at least. Then you will be looking for more companies who might be not the best in that market anyways. Okay, got your point there. And I would like to also ask, how much of your success is due to luck or hard work?
Oh,
what
definitely
do you think
luck.
about this?
I think of course, like you have to be hardworking to seize that luck and opportunity, etc. But I was really lucky because of a lot of things. So first of all, after I came back to Turkey, I'm like earning some money. I wasn't thinking of becoming an angel investor that much. But one of my friends, who's actually one of our portfolio companies now, Firefly. So this company that raised $100 million from Google Ventures. And one of the CTO, their owner, is a good friend of mine, also from high school. Both of the founders are from my high school in Izmir. So that guy joined an angel network for 6 months while he was in Istanbul. He pushed me to become an angel, so I became an angel. And then I randomly met with 500 startups, and then they invited me to the Stanford program, which I went to. And then that turned out to be a fun. So that's 6 months of my life, which would be like mid 2015 to beginning 2016. I think I was so lucky that everything straightened out. And then, of course, I worked really hard. So that was the time where I got really fat. So you can find a picture of me online. It's like a huge beard and glasses with Dave McClure. I'm really, really fat in that picture. This was from a blog post that I wrote while I was taking classes in Stanford. So I gained a lot of weight. I broke up with my girlfriend, so it was a sad time for me. I had these lightnings in my brain, which was really weird. So every day for like a couple of minutes, I would feel lightening in my brain. So I went to the doctor. They do MR scans with it. There's something. There's nothing. It's probably because of stress. So that 6 months, I worked really hard, but it all started with the lucky event. So if I would kind of attribute to one or the other, I would say luck more than hardworking. Definitely, definitely.
Thank you. So it's always kind of stands in a point of a combination, but it's also, I guess, important to stick to that things we call luck and then build on it, right?
Yeah. I'm more of like a destiny kind of person, or like,
yeah.
I believe a lot of the good things happen to me because of externalities, not internalities. A lot of things that happen to me are not because I've made that happen, but because I went to a good school or because I knew people, which were more externalities that came from my environment. So I shouldn't be attributing them to myself, but rather to luck or destiny or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Enis, for your time,
Thank you.
your wisdom, your experiences. This was a great session. I would like to I'm going to finish this by announcing our next speaker. Thank you very, very much that you have been here and shared your ideas. This is really valuable for us and for our community.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I look forward to cooperating more in the Accelerator.
Hopefully, yeah, sure. Our next speaker is Fadi Bishara, who is the founder of Blackbox, which is a global founder accelerator based in Silicon Valley. So next week, not exactly the same time. We are changing our time from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. But sorry, it is going to be at 7 p.m. I've just get confused with the information here, but I think it's going to be 7 p.m. Then if it's different, we are going to update you. And I would like you to go ahead. 7?
It'll be at 6 p.m. and end at 7.
Okay. So it's
so that
starting.
You can join and still do iftar if they want to.
Okay, the next time. It's same time, right?
No, it starts at 6 instead of 7.
Okay. It's going to start at 6 p.m. 6th of May at 6 p.m. Sorry for the confusion. My information here is outdated, I guess. So, and please fill out the survey. Daria is going to be posting in the chat very shortly. It's very important for us to improve these speaker sessions and what are you looking for in this kind of sessions. So please fill them out. Thank you everyone for being here. It was a pleasure for me in this session. See you next week.